When do I what?
Bill, do me a favor. Sign that for me.
My God.
Yeah, I'm an old.
It's great.
Dynamite, huh?
Thanks. I went to Toronto with the Dead in the Airplane and met a couple of New Yorkers, Josh White and Kip Cohn, who were talking about doing something in New York. And then sometime after that, we received a petition signed by a bunch of people who lived on the Lower East Side to do something here. So I came to New York and looked at this building and went for it with the real estate people, and then found out some other people were looking to open up here also, and ended up getting it and hiring some people in the East Coast to run it with me. But basically it was because it was suggested by Josh and Kip and some people in New York who had been to the West Coast, to the Fillmore. And then we opened in March of '68 with Janis Joplin and Big Brother. Memorable, you'd have to exclude just the quality. The most memorable by far would have to be the night somebody threw a Molotov cocktail, which was aimed for the grocery store on the corner, and the Who were playing for a week at the Fillmore, and the firemen came into the side doors in the front with their picks and their shovels and their axes, and the public thought that it was part of the act. And the group kept right on playing, and the fire inspector tried to jump on the stage, and Roger and Pete just shoved him right off the stage. And it was pandemonium. The audience loved it because they thought it was part of the show, and the smoke started coming in the side doors. Then I remember they finished the show, but they had to hide because the cops were looking for them because they kicked the guy off the stage. And I walked on the stage. I remember, folks, there's a fire across the street. Would you just file out? And they filed out, and they all thought it was still part of the show. And then we had to surrender the Who the next day to the police voluntarily, and they were filed charges and they were dropped, but they were kept at the police station until about 15 minutes before the next night's show. Then they ran around from 5th Street from the police station and came in just in time to do the show the second night. Pretty insane, but it was great. That was by far the most. There were a lot of great shows, but that was it. That was a great memory. Oh, that was the great thing about that era, that you could do great things with the musicians, and you were able to match groups. But I remember 3 nights in a row with Zappa here, we decided to have a different mama. Like a Chinese woman would start the first show and come on the stage with bags of food and feed the whole band Chinese food. The next night it was Italian food, and the third night it was Jewish home cooking. I think the best one backstage was when we had the Crosby, Stills, Nash Young. And it got to a point, they played for 6 nights, and every night they said, well, we'll just play for 3 hours. This encore stuff is silly back and forth, which is going to play, and there are going to be no encores. I said, it's not fair to the public. They always like an encore. You can play 43 hours, but unless you do an encore, they don't feel good. So this one night, they came in the theater and they swore they weren't going to do one. And they played for 2.5 hours, and they went upstairs to the 3rd floor, locked the door, and the public went crazy. And I ran upstairs, and I remember I took a 3x5, which I always carry around with me. And I wrote these notes under the door to the group. And I remember I said, please, for the sake of my Swiss bank account. And they laughed, but they wouldn't open the door. And then, please, for the concessions are running out, and I can't hold them much longer. And it was on, and maybe 10, 15 minutes, they wouldn't come out. I remember going downstairs and got a hold of Michael Ahern, who was the stage manager, and I said, Michael, the house lights are up now. I'm going to run upstairs, and I'll be right back. So I ran up and I counted. It took about 14 seconds to reach the 3rd floor. And I said, I'm going to run upstairs again, and when you count the 14 seconds, bring the house lights down, because when you bring the house lights down, the people think the show's going to go on again, and they go crazy. So I said, now. So I run up the steps, And I knocked on the door and they said, and Neil Young and David and Graham and Stephen were all inside. They said, see, they've quieted down. Quieted down. I said, 13, 14. I opened the door, 14, the house lights dimmed, the audience went crazy, and I said, listen to that. I said, my God, they still want us to come down. And they came down and played for a half hour. Those are the kind of things that made those days great.
Were there any particular distinctions between managing the Fillmore East and Fillmore West, or anything that you can, pinpoint for us about that? Different scenes.
Well, by far the most specific difference had to be the street. I came from New York, and being a New Yorker dealing on the West Coast, I always felt that just the knowledge of this jungle was the key to being able to deal out there. You can be much more direct. You can be direct in New York, and New Yorker says, the hell with you. You go back out there, it's effective because it's New York. And the one difference from the very first day was always that I couldn't do here what I got away with out there. I remember the very first night, and it all involved security and finally how to deal with New York Street as opposed to California Street. And we had Big Brother, and the line was around the block, and I always made it a habit to go around the building to see what was coming in. And the line was coming in, and there were 3 kids standing by the side door, neighborhood kids, 12, 13 years old. And as I'm going past them, they're like I used to do when I lived in the Bronx. You bang on the side door, somebody pops it open. The 3 of them standing there banging against the back door. And in California, I would never stop and say to somebody, go away or don't do that. I would just come on very positive and in such a direct way that they would always do it. And so I used to walk past them and say, get out of there. I did it to these 3 kids. It's like I was talking to the wall. They didn't move. So I went back there and I said, did you hear me? And 2 of them moved. The 3rd one just kept on banging his foot. And I remember going back to him, I said, did you hear me? Get out of here. And he banged on the door, did a John Wayne, and just said, fuck you. And that more than anything, that's when I realized this was New York. And I asked him where he lived, and he said he lived across the street. And I said, look, we're going to be loading and unloading trucks here. What's your name? Who are your friends? And it turned out in the long run, they then became part of the team that loaded and unloaded the trucks. In exchange for that, they'd watch the vehicles, they took care of the block, and we let them in to see the shows. But right off the bat, that never changed. The street was the major difference.
What happened and why did you decide to close the Fillmore East? What happened?
That's touching. It was always blown out of proportion and a lot of misquotes. And what had happened? A great impresario. That word is loosely used, and there was only one that I remember. Saul Hurok was in the great impresario, and he had a cancellation at the Metropolitan Opera House in early '68, and he asked to meet with me to bring some rock and roll acts into the Metropolitan Opera House. And I figured, my God, if we can play there, then houses around the country would open, because there was still a reluctancy at that time to let rock and roll into quality houses. I was doing that and negotiating with various acts. And some things had gone astray with some act that I wanted them to play here. They wanted more money. They wanted to go uptown to the Garden and whatnot. Anyway, we all make decisions sometimes that at a time when the bubble burst, I was on the edge about certain things, and I was out here, and late on a Saturday night, I was in the office here. The second show was going on, and the manager of a particular band called me back at about 3 in the morning, and I talked to him about the Metropolitan Opera House. I said, my God, we can break through. It's a great opportunity for rock and roll to go first class and be recognized for what it is. And I said, 8 shows at the Metropolitan House, but the union is tough up there and the expenses are high. And for 8 shows that week, it's 50 grand, but it's the Metropolitan Opera House. And it was a very good group, qualitatively, instrumentally. And there was a pause on the phone, and the manager said, you expect my boys to play for lousy 50 grand a week? The way he said that burst my bubble. I never even thought about closing. That was it. it's yeah, it's hard for me to say that. Uh, it's not that there is for me. I'll tell you, about 3 years ago, something happened to me here, and over the years you come back and people say hello, 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 but about the family aspect. I was running up on Madison in the 70s, right, in the mornings. It's about 7 in the morning. I'm running along and I stop on at the curb. There's a light and there's cars coming through. These two other runners come up and running in place next to me, a man and a woman. And as we jumped off the curb, the woman just hits me on the arm and says, shouldn't have closed the Fillmore. It just keeps right on running. So I don't think the family aspect was people who worked here. The people who worked here came here not because I looked at their resumes, because they wanted to be involved in turning the public on, and taking the ticket taker and just riding with it. Though the Jane Garrity's and the Josh and Kip and Pat Luce and all those people, and the guys who worked security in front of the building, we started hiring brains and not brawn. If you had size and brains, fine, but use your mind and use your common sense. And if there was any prerequisite for working here, it was just that you should have common sense and imagine yourself in the place of the ticket holder and how would you want to be treated. And we went crazy. I went crazy sometimes, and you lose your temper when a guy says spare change 93 times right in front of the door. You go bananas, or I went bananas. And dealing with the street people and the motherfuckers at that time, the people who wanted the building just because they wanted the building. They were the great old days. They were great. It's not so important that I would be involved. It would be nice if somewhere, sometime, either in our lifetime or sometime again in the future, that we could all experience that same feeling, even though a lot of the fantasies weren't fulfilled, and this didn't become Valhalla, and the dreams remain dreams for a lot of people. But there were moments, and there were afternoons and evenings or weekends. There were more special times in those 3 or 4 years as far as watching the public than the consummate total of all the other years, by far. Because the artist and the patron were both there for the same reason. Let's get on, let's boogie, let's have a good time, let's listen to the words and the music and look at each other. It happens sometimes now, you know, at a Dead show, at a Dylan show, Stones. There are some groups that still, you walk in and it's one. But more often than not now, people go to be entertained. Then people came to a scene to be part of an expression. And it was a privilege to be part of that, because it was a learning process. Being a New Yorker, raised here, raised in the Catskills, going to California, living in San Francisco in the 60s, learning about when to watch the clock, when not to watch the clock, what you can do with your body, what you can't do, the misconceptions about happiness, what contentment was all about. I'm glad I was part of that. No blueprints then. It was first for everything.
And then I went out to the West Coast. I have a daughter out there. She's 16, and the change was incredible. I mean, it was like a real culture shock to me. I had been out there, and I left in the 70s, I guess 1970. Went back, and I had a business here, and folded. Went out there and tried to find, my family that,
Right.
And it was a real culture shock. People, I went to Haight-Ashbury, it was, different. There was no more hippies, no more. It just, more mainstream life. It changed a lot. And there was still. I had friends that still lived there, but they were more conformed. The people that were hippies that would never work there, now they work in nothing but both shops and stuff.
You got to. that time people lived 10 to a room and it was okay.
I,
Now,
I always, man, when I lived out in the West Coast, I always had.
yeah, but you wouldn't do that now because you couldn't.
Now,
It
very hard.
wouldn't.
See, I'm scared to travel like that. You know, and, like I'm free to go wherever I want right now. You know, I'm not working right now, and I would like that experience going. Just
So what a lot of
get up
people
and
now
go,
work
you
and
know,
travel and you live at other
travel,
people's houses.
Hitchhike cross country, you know, but you can't do that no more. I'm terrified of that.
In a way, it's a good thing. Too many people didn't got away with a lot, and it was the other guy who had to fend for them.
And then I had.
I would like to go to your house and stay at your house for a while, and you feed me.
I would like. I had a trip like Easy Rider thing happened. I was hitchhiking, right? And I forgot where I was, and some trucker came by with a bag, you know, and it just swung from my head, you know, and I thought that was it. I mean, if I didn't duck, man, he kept going. But then, you know, I mean, these people are very hostile towards, you know, I've had to throw water, I mean, I'm dying of thirst, you know, somewhere in the Death Valley, trying, you know, I got on my way cross country many times, I flew back and forth. I must have made, you know, 30, 40 trips.
My God.
I like them. See, now I'm scared to do it. I'm scared to go to Philadelphia. You know what I mean? Like, that's the only hop, skip, and a
I'm
jump. You know what I mean?
try going to the
Another
Bronx.
city. Oh, you know,